Well, welcome back to our reflection on Sunday sermons. Sunday, we talked about fairness and treating each other with fairness because you know what? We live in a world where we know that things are fair and things are not fair. And we see that in inequity when it takes place. And so somebody gets two pieces of pizza, somebody else only gets one, and it doesn't seem fair. Or somebody gets to do something twice and the other person only gets to do it once, and we think that doesn't seem fair. Or two people have the same job and one gets a high pay, other gets a low pay, and it seems like that doesn't seem fair. Or somebody has an insurance company that will cover insurance surgery, and another person, their insurance won't cover it, and it doesn't seem fair. And so, we live in a world where things are evaluated based on their fairness or their unfairness. And when it gets to be a big thing, sometimes when we see injustice or when we see unfairness, people will look up to God and says, where's the fairness of that God? And really what it does, it oftentimes causes them to build a case against why they can't believe in God because there's just so much unfairness in the world. And how could God allow that to happen? It doesn't seem fair. Or why didn't God do something about that? It doesn't seem fair. And so they build their case against believing in God because of that. But here's what C.S. Lewis did. He did just the opposite. He looked at the unfairness and the injustice of our world, and he said, you know what? That actually builds the case that there is a God. I mean, it builds a case that if there's a higher moral standard than what is really what we're used to here in this world. And so otherwise, it would simply be, you know what? Sure, there's strong people and there's weak people, and sure, it's okay for the strong people to prey on the weak. Sure, there's corruption in our world, and it's all right for the corrupt person to take advantage of the one who's innocent. And sure, there's powerful people, and it's all right for the powerful person to, abuse the one with less power. But because that feels unfair to us, I mean, C.S. Lewis tells us that we were created for a world where fairness ruled. And that's why we long for fairness. That's why we feel it's not right to be treated unfairly. Now, Sunday we talked about what's our response to be when it comes to the unfairness directed towards us. I mean, because the fact of the matter is, as we said Sunday, there are things that happen against us that are unfair. And so how do we respond to that? And I just want to remind you that we said that the Bible really gives us kind of three ways to respond to it. First of all, that we just continue to show love to the person who's treating us unfairly, that we continue to live out the love of Christ for them. Second of all, we just commit ourselves to trusting in God, knowing that He can make good things come out of things that don't seem that good at all, and He can, work out those things for our good. And so we continue to trust Him. And third of all, we see as an opportunity to have our character develop, that, suffering produces endurance, as we said, endurance produces character. And so it can be a character building opportunity for us when we experience that in our lives. But here, I'm going to go a little bit different direction today, though. And I'm going to talk about the fact that, when it comes to God being a fair God, we should be grateful. Okay, I'm going to say it like that we should be grateful that God doesn't always treat us fairly. I mean, we're glad that God is a God who's fair, but there's a kind of a gratitude that on our part, that God doesn't give us what we deserve. God doesn't treat us by what we should get, but that God treats us sometimes that go beyond what's fair. And so that, I mean, if God treated us only fairly, that would be a pretty hard pill to swallow. And, and Israel understood that. The nation of Israel understood that. And that's why when you look at the book of Psalms, you find 7 Psalms in the book of Psalms that have to do with, they're called the penitential Psalms. There are Psalms that have to do with a person experiencing sadness over what they've done, and they're looking not for the justice of God against what they've done, but the mercy of God. And so that's what they're really hoping, that God will not give them fairness, but that He will demonstrate to them His kindness by showing them mercy. And one of those Psalms is Psalm 130. So let me just look at that Psalm with you. And I want to just remind you, and why I picked this Psalm, is that just reminds us that, the fairness of God, when we want a God who's fair, but the fairness of God too is the idea that He sees the frame of what we're like. He knows the weakness that we have. He knows the tendency that we have to sin. and he responds to us fairly by showing us his mercy. And so, I mean, these Psalms, Psalm 130 is an example of a psalm that reminds us that we have a God in his fairness shows us mercy for the things that we've done that are against his word or against his will. So here's the psalm. It starts by saying this: "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy." See, that's what this psalmist is calling for. He's calling for God not to hear his cry for justice, but what he's calling for is for God to hear his cry for mercy. I mean, he's not crying to get what he deserves from God. He's crying not to get what he knows he deserves for God. And so that's why it's called this penitential psalm, because we're penitent for what we've done, and we're praying that God will show mercy. And the impression is that because he hasn't listened to God, when you think about why would this man write this, because the impression you get from the psalm is that he hasn't listened to God. He's gone his own way. He's fallen into a trap. He's in the pit. He's in a hole that's so deep he can't get out, and the only hope that he has is for God to hear his cry, and also for God then to respond in mercy. And so he's looking for the mercy of God. And what's the mercy that he wants? Well, he tells us that in the next two verses, because what he's really looking for is that God would show him the mercy of forgiveness. And so here's what he says: "If you, O Lord, kept a record of sins, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness there, and therefore you are feared," or you are revered, would be a better translation. See, he knows this, that if God kept track of all of his sin, he kept record of his sin, he would be doomed. I mean, and so he knows that his only hope now is forgiveness from God. And, that's true for us as well, isn't it? I mean, none of us should have any confidence at all that we can stand before God on Judgment Day relying on our own goodness. I mean, that would never happen. None of us can think that we can stand before God and say, "God, you know what? You can't condemn me." That would be unfair. No, the fact of the matter is, he could condemn us, and that would be the fair thing. And so our hope isn't found in the fact that we are, holy before him. Our hope is found in the fact that we are forgiven by him. And so the psalmist understands that, and he wants us to understand that as well. But he understands it so deeply that he's just waiting for that forgiveness to be offered to him. So he's looking for it, and he's waiting for it. And so there's this heart of eagerness that, "God, you got to do this for me, or else I'm going to be doomed. And so I'm waiting on you, Lord." And that's really becomes a reason for verses 5 and 6. So what does he say? "I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I put my hope." That's where he's putting his trust. That's where he's putting his confidence. And in his word I put my hope. And then he adds, "My soul waits for the Lord more than a watchman waits for the morning." More than a watchman waits for the morning. I mean, twice he says that. More than a watchman waits for the morning. More than a watchman waits for the morning. And the reason he says that is because there's a hunger on his part to receive the forgiveness that he knows that only God can supply. And so he's waiting for it, and he's longing for it, and he wants to experience it. And so he's looking for God to be true to the promises that God has made, that I am a forgiving God and I can forgive you. That's what he's waiting for. And so God said it, he believes it, and he's waiting for God to do it. And so that's where he comes. And then it ends with this interesting thing that he does. He not only applies that to his own life, but he broadens it to let the whole nation of Israel know that what he's looking for God to do for him, that God will do for the whole nation. And so how does it end? It ends by saying, "O Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is mercy, and with him abundant redemption." Not just forgiveness, but abundant redemption. Redemption that can cover the sins of the whole nation. In fact, that's how he ends. He says, "He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins." And so that's the penitential psalm, because what it reminds us of is, even though we know our God is fair, we also know that, and he will bring his justice to bear on people's lives, he's also a God of mercy. And sometimes more than we need justice, we need mercy. And so it's a great reminder to us that we should be grateful that God doesn't always treat us fairly, but he will always treat us with mercy. And even when we find ourselves fallen into a trap, into a pit that we caused on our own, we still have the power to call out to him, and he'll still respond to us with mercy. That's what this psalmist understood, and that's what he wanted all of us who listen to this psalm to understand as well. Well, I hope you have a great day. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday as well. But just remember, you know what? We live in a world that's unfair, but we have an ability to treat others with great fairness, like God treats us, even remembering us that we are frail and that we oftentimes fall into sin, and he treats us fairly by the God who shows mercy. Have a great day. God bless.